Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the TheGoodCastShow. So today's episode is basically inspired by one of my viewers who basically sent me a comment on my video I did featuring teacher Tanusha, where we were discussing Muda's involvement in Indian issues. In his comment, he said, let's look at the big picture too. There are 47K non-Indians versus 3K Indians in terms of dropouts. And he said, so basically he was highlighting the fact that we don't have that many dropouts from education, and so see the positivity also. To that, I replied that I'll be highlighting this in future interviews. And he also went on to mention that per capita population ratio, we have 18.3% graduates. So we are the most educated race. I've neither denying nor confirming this, but to Mr. Dharan, this show is for you. Now, moving forward, today's topic is going to be the Malaysian Indian solution, inspired by the Malaysian Indian blueprint, and my guest today. He's a program director at Heriot Ward University, Malaysia. He is a co-founder of the Nation Building School. He's been involved in amazing projects such as Football for Tomorrow. He's also been awarded such accolades such as the Best Energy Savings Performance Agreement at the National Energy Awards 2020. He's been part of prestigious panels and speaking engagements at global forums, including the MIT Technology Review Global Panel and TEDx. He's also been a part of the Prime Minister's Department, working under the infamous Datuk Seri Najib Razak, and was part of SEDIC, now rebranded to Mitra. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Marques Jeevan Menon. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
Quite an introduction.
Yes. Thank you. You have a lot, and you're only 32 years old.
Yes, turning 33 in August.
Wow, you make me question my life choices. Now, I have to ask this question because since I heard this, it's been in my mind. You've served under Prime Minister Datuk Seri Najib Razak in his Prime Minister's office. Now, I have to ask, how was he like? And especially in terms of his leadership, in terms of his commitment to the Indian people.
I think, to put it simply, he was a very concerned Prime Minister about the affairs of the community itself. Now, in this particular question, we have to put aside the sentiments that is, of course, now surrounding several issues pertaining him. Within the premises of the scandals, of course, the questions may be different, but when it came to administrative issues and issues that were more structural and needed to be addressed, I think he was a man of expediency. So he was very focused on actions that needed to be taken. And of course, he was also well aware about challenges on the ground, meaning that you do not necessarily get the top-down effect immediately. There needs to be more involvement, more engagement. And of course, when you talk about consolidation, that had to be done in a more structural way. Because without consolidation, what will happen is that you get a lot of misalignments in the system, whereby the instructions from above come with a certain purpose, but it does not get relayed all the way down. So you do not see the effect of what needs to be done. Okay. So in simple terms, he was a very concerned, and I think the work that he has done speaks volume about what kind of commitment he gave to the community itself. I think you ask anyone who was in that ecosystem, of course, there will be defectors who say fundamentally the Indians are still, to a certain extent, behind. But again, those are very anecdotal and opinion-based views that are given. Yeah. So this is just my piece.
Understand. Now, you're probably going to guess the next question that's coming after this as a follow-up.
Yes.
So we have a new Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim. Yes. And since you served under Datuk Seri Najib Razak, let's place them together, comparison. What do you think, how do they differ in terms of their leadership and their commitment to the Indian people?
All right. So you've got to understand one thing. We are not comparing an apple to apple here. We have to be fair and understanding to a certain scenario in which Datuk Seri Anwar is in right now. The circumstances are very different. So you're playing with very different set of cards right now. What happened during Datuk Seri Najib's tenure was when Malaysia was in a very different position. And of course, if you look at where we are right now, the baseline is much lower, and there needs to be more work put into the kind of policies that are being framed right now to actually get back to the very least the initial baselines that we were starting with back in probably the early 2010s. If you ask me to compare them, I don't think it is a position that I can easily take because, like I said, these are very different times for Malaysia. But you've got to understand the power of relevance that Datuk Seri Anwar has been sort of part of. So he was from a generation that championed reformasi, and of course, throughout the decades, the fight has always been about reform. In structural manners, in ways of administration, talking about legislative reforms, and looking at the country as a whole. Now, these are very complicated and complex issues to tackle in the current situation that we're in, because you got to understand it's like taking your central nervous system and restructuring it. So that requires a lot of work, okay, and the intensity that's probably going to be required of him is greater compared to how we were at that point of time in the past. So again, we've got to be cognizant of the fact that we are dealing with very different scenarios at the moment. And I think what's most important is to also look at the situation from a multidimensional point of view. You cannot just come out and say, I'll just give you something that I preferably will not like to talk about, but because I'm a numbers guy, so when you're looking at numbers, it's a very different perspective that you take. But when you say, for example, the education system needs to be relooked at, it's such a motherhood statement, and it's a blanket opinion that is given without actually looking into the facts and figures behind it. So today you have to understand that the accessibility and barriers are very different compared to how it was before. Accessibility to free market is so much more convenient compared to how it used to be before. Now, it's about leveraging. But at the same time, before you even leverage, you've got to perfect the back end and ensure that what is going out into the free market has got product market fit, has got quality. So I think the current government has got a lot to relook at, and I think that's what's happening. These blueprints are great, but at the same time, you need to walk the talk. I think that has been said by many commentators in the past, so I don't want to be repeating that. But what I aspire to see, at least within the closest time frame, which is by the end of 2024, is something a bit more robust and visible that can be felt by people. And I think in Datuk Seri Najib's time, you had that through initiatives like, the One Malaysia Clinic, the One Malaysia, stores that were available for the B40 community. You had, of course, at that point of time, the most, I think, one of the most brilliant things that he did was extending the hours at the UTC, to cater to the requirements of average Malaysians that probably needed to go after their working hours. So these are simple things that, it does not require much in terms of investments, but you've got to look at the cost of it.
Okay.
So how do you actually, utilize low cost solutions into making your current system more efficient?
Okay. Now let's start this on a different note, because usually even myself, I think I've been guilty of basically riding the wave of what other people have been saying, which is a lot of negative stereotypes, perpetuating negative stereotypes and commentators. There's been a lot of opinions about the Indian community, but in my research and as I go deeper into the situation, I realize that a lot of these, like what you said, is based on sentiment. It's not really based on facts, right? So you being in SEDIC and you being a numbers person, as you say, could you share maybe briefly a few statistics in the areas of entrepreneurship and education that could derail some of the widely accepted narratives about the Indian people today?
Sure. Now, just to provide context to this, of course, my stint in SEDIC was very brief, the work that I did. I would have hoped to be there longer. Of course, 2018 happened, and then there was a wave of basically. I don't like to call it a witch hunt, but it was more of looking at everything that was there and just demolishing everything to rebuild back from start or scratch. When you look at the work that was done at that point of time, we wanted to look into several key areas, primarily into areas like welfare, education, and also access to your identity cards, for those who were stateless at that point of time.
Yeah.
So these were pertinent issues to the community. And of course, when you look at an average middle-class Malaysian, now some issues may not be directly influencing them because they feel that, okay, look, I'm dealing with a very different set of problems and I need to have a different set of solutions for the kinds of things that we are looking at. Now, at that point of time, of course, there were plans in place to relook at how we identify skills for these people, meaning looking at upskilling, reskilling, and then eventually getting them to consider shifting careers. I've always been a person that has stood by this notion or idea that in order for you to thrive in a bustling city, right, like KL at the moment. So KL has gone from being the capital city of Malaysia into a more commercial center, because we've got to understand the global trend right now. We have to be relevant when it comes to marketing ourselves to either investor communities or the business communities overseas. And KL, of course, besides KL, you have Penang, you have Johor and all the likes of this. But KL primarily has always been the center because we have got all these iconic, structures around us. And more importantly, it's about accessibility, with LRT, MRT, and all these other public transportation services. It has always been an attractive destination for the global community itself. So now, sorry for digressing, but going back to what I was mentioning, when you look at issues surrounding these areas, for example, when you talk about how do you compare someone who's from an urban settlement and a rural settlement, the issues that are around these people, or again, the work at SEDIC was very microscopic. You've got to look at it so when I was there, at least the view or rather position that I took was you've got to go back to the numbers and understand what needs more heavy requirements. So we can have, of course, we can have all these initiatives going on with welfare, with, like I mentioned earlier, education and all that. But you've got to look at other areas. So entrepreneurship is definitely one of them. When you talk about entrepreneurship, the idea is to have some form of an initiative going on that requires you to be creative, innovative, and marketable or commercial enough for you to then say that I am an entrepreneur. Whether you are self-employed, so when you're self-employed, you're either selling yourself as a product, or you're selling your service as a product. And when you talk about selling yourself, essentially it's whatever that you sell, people buy from you because they see you. So like for example, this show, the way people actually buy into this is, of course, the content that you create and you curate. So again, looking at all these details, what we really wanted to understand is how now can we plug this into a solution? And the solution was actually quite simple because, again, you've got to understand the uniqueness in, or rather, I would like to say, this is the beauty in the challenge that we have. Now, you see all these agencies having solutions, pertaining what they can offer. And sometimes people say, oh no, it's redundant. They have all these agencies who are doing, the same kind of work. But what if you dig deeper? What I feel is that if you dig deeper and you start to look at those solutions, you then can actually integrate a well-rounded solution for yourself and make use of what they have. So it's not so much about, again, we have to come up with a new solution. It's about going back to what we have. And it's like, okay, say for example, you have a store in your house and you needed to clean your lawn. Now you've got all these items there, and for a certain time, of course, they're not used. But then when there is a pressing need, the use then comes into effect. So that's essentially what we wanted to look at. Utilizing items in the store to then channel them as solutions or mechanisms into existing issues. So when we started the blueprint, I think that was the idea in place. But of course, again, I don't want to just sing praises about this. Of course, eventually we had to encounter challenges. You encounter challenges mainly with people. So you've got to understand the way the Malaysian structure is sort of set up is that it's heavily reliant on politics.
Okay.
We drive a political economy, whether you like it or not. It's from, at least it slowly is starting to fade off. You don't really see that too much these days. Of course, it's still there. I'm not saying that you don't have that anymore, but what you would have seen or noticed in the past, especially during a certain period of time, is that unless or until you get into the circle of influences of certain people, only then can you get certain projects or
understand
ways of doing things done faster lah.
Okay.
Without mentioning names, I think it gives a perception about the kind of shift that has happened over the years. So that's also another thing that I think Datuk Seri, so coming back to your question earlier about how Datuk Seri Najib and Anwar is different, PMX right now has made that shift very clear. But of course, with all these court cases that have been dropped and certain decisions that have been made, it doesn't look too good on his administration lah.
Definitely doesn't look good. Yeah. But in terms of now that you have left Siddiq, right? It's been rebranded to become Mitra.
Yeah.
Right. And it did go through a tough time in terms of allegations and people condemning them, saying that they may not have been doing as much as they can for the Indian community. And now it's been headed by YB Prabhakaran. So, you were part of SEDIC, you were part of the Prime Minister's department. What would you advise him on what he should do first in order to rebrand Mitra as actually an entity an agency that actually does good for the people?
I think visibility, that's number one.
Okay.
So you have to be seen more by the people that you're serving. You've got to be aware that people are watching and they want answers. So unless and until you engage enough people, so the kind of approach that we currently take is very, I would say to a certain extent, it's still very conventional, even when you talk about social media. Now, the question is how many, of course, you've started to see more of these conversations now take place in podcasts. They are starting to think outside the box with, the way they communicate to the public, which is good. But you've got to understand that people want to see you. So if right now, Prabha has to really step up his game, and primarily visibility is important. So he has to be seen at areas of genuine concern.
Yeah.
So if you talk about the education system, he has to be present there, providing some kind of feedback that Mitra has obtained. I give you a simple, for example, I've actually come up with some numbers today. All right. So one very simple thing that, probably an organization like Mitra can adopt is a study on different segments of the society and looking into actual needs that they are currently facing. So, for example, here, the most basic thing is to divide the community firstly by their age group and by their gender. Because by understanding that primarily, you'll then look at the concerns a bit more deeper. Number two would be looking at job sectors.
Definitely.
So are you in professional services, manufacturing, agriculture, retail, healthcare, legal services, or even for a fact of people being in the civil service itself. So looking at those numbers, then you understand, again, a different dimension of the issue, right? A simple statistical exercise that I did, for this particular discussion that we had, that we were going to have. I looked at 2 different years between 2020 as a baseline, a more recent baseline, and 2023. So this is basically data within 3 years or 4 years right now that has been taken. And if you look at the numbers, when people say that, okay, we don't have enough seats in institutions of higher learning, just for reference, we note here, okay, we have roughly about, in primary school alone, we have roughly about 25% of the population who are in primary school.
Okay.
Okay. And then if you're talking about secondary school, again, it's roughly about 23 to about 25%. We're talking about students who are right now in their foundation level or doing their pre-U undergraduate studies, whether it's your A levels or whatever. We have at least about 5% there, okay, of the community. I'm not talking about a specific age group right now, but of course I have the numbers by age group here. Now,
when you say 5%, you mean 5% of the Indian community or 5%?
Yeah, 5% of the Indian community. So the Indian community number for 2020 was about 6.6% out of the total population. And at that point of time, the total population was about 33.2 million. We had about 2.25 to about 2.3 million people in Malaysia. If you look at the numbers today, in 2023, it was about the same. Now, the only difference is, if you look at the pie for Malaysia, the numbers have increased from 33.2 million to about 34 million in the past 3 years. Okay, which is about 1 point something million people.
Yeah.
And we are still maintaining that same portion of the whole community pie, I would say. Now, I don't think when you talk about any kind of changes in numbers, the community itself is affected, because if you look at the numbers in 2023, we had, again, the number of students who were in primary school was roughly about 21 to 22%, which was an increase about roughly 1%. And then you had roughly about the same percentage of increase, it's about 1 to 2% in secondary school goers. For students who were enrolled in public university, we had roughly about, in 2020, we had about, let me just see here, we had about close to 15% who were in public university, 15% of the population, which is still a lot, okay? Now, 15%, and when you look at the discussion that was there about the quota system, they were still fighting for like 10%.
But 15% already.
But 15% were already, 15% were already enrolled in public institutions. And when you talk about public institutions, of course, they are students who go in because they get a placement. And of course, when you go in, you still pay a certain fee. Okay? Now, that is one way of going in. The second way is you get a scholarship to get in. So there are students from both sets of whatever segments that I just told you in the public university premise itself. Meaning, if you're looking at students going into the public university, that premise has got two inputs. Okay. So, again, we're still arguing about
quota system and all
something superficial, and we've actually passed that barrier. And like what your commentator said about 18% that are graduating, yes, we have 18% in totality. Roughly, that is an estimate. It could be more, but 18% is an average, because you have public university students who are graduating and you have private university students who are graduating as well. So just to give you an idea, public university students, like if you look at the segment again, it's roughly about 5 to 10% of the community segment that is in the private university segment, which if you look at it in retrospect, that essentially is your T20 Indians. That is a simple assumption. If you want to be simplistic, that is an assumption you can make. But again, you got to look at how many students are going in because of scholarships. You got to see how many of them are getting, financial support, and the ones that are actually paying. You will see that the ones that are actually paying is a bit more smaller, because of course these are the T20 groups. Okay, especially if we're talking about like UK, Malaysian, UK universities that are in Malaysia. If you're talking about private universities that are in Malaysia, if you're paying, it doesn't cost you small money. So again, we've got to look at numbers. And one example that I just gave you proves why I say that, many of the kinds of issues that we still bring out till date, especially issues around race relations. Let's be real. You're telling me there are no racist Indians.
No, I will do one better. I think everybody is a racist to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Everybody. I've said some racist shit behind closed doors. I'll be honest.
I mean, we all are to a certain extent. I mean, whether you like it or not. I mean, let's not be hypocrites.
Yeah. Now, I want to get one thing is because today I saw this article, but this is an old article on Free Malaysia Today featuring YB Johari Abdul Ghani. And he said that he mooted the idea of there should be tailor-made policies for the Malaysian Indian community, particularly in the B40 category, because the reason for this was in a report, it saw that most of the members in the B40 community across all ethnicities have SPM qualification or less.
Yeah.
So the idea was that in order to create policies that would elevate the educational qualifications in this group, to remove them from this group, right? We're talking about social mobility here. Now, the thing is, and I also include you in this because you are part of the government. A lot of times this conversation seems to degenerate into we need to create policies, we need to do this, we need to meet, we need to discuss, come up with blueprints and all that. But I'll give you one example. I'll give you two. Say, for example, in the Malaysian Indian blueprint, it was written that 55% of young Indian children do not have access to preschool. Right? So obviously the entire domino effect of this would be that when they go to school, they are behind. And this whole problem continues, right? Now, when you have such a problem, the answer is pretty simple. You do a public to private partnership program where you create preschools in B40 areas to provide them with access to these schools at subsidized prices. Problem solved. Another one is Tamil schools. Now the big issue is falling enrollment, right? Enrollment declining and all that. But the reason is not that people don't want to go to Tamil schools. It's also because of accessibility. Okay. A lot of Tamil schools are in rural areas, in estates where Indians have urbanized and come out. So that could be why. Another thing also is that the location of these schools are so close to one another.
Yeah.
So they are competing for the same pool. So the idea is move it, relocate. So why is it when the answer is so simple, when you are in government, you have the resources and all that, why not do anything about it for the past 50 years, 60 years?
Okay, very good question. Now, I want to throw a question back and make you probably think a bit. Now, would you change something that works for you?
Works for me?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't, right?
Yeah. It works for me, yeah.
So for the past 50 years, it has been working for them. That's in simple terms.
Okay.
Now, why has it been working for them? It's because of...
Who are we talking about by them?
I can basically...
The shadowy figures.
So whoever them is, essentially would be people who are within a system of governance and administration. You've got to understand two things here. One, I've got to do what's best for me before I consider what's best for you. What's best for me is to spend the least amount of money and make everyone happy equally or unhappy equally. So meaning that I can't make you happy as much as I make him or her happy. So what I'll do is I'll make both of you equally unhappy. You understand? So meaning that you get enough, but you still want more.
One more.
He or she gets enough, but they still want more. So you can't come and say that I favored you. They can come and say that I favored them. Now, of course, within the system, that's how cronyism came to be. Because you got to understand, as much as I'm trying to make everyone, balanced out, I've got to also take care of my interests. So without getting too much into the philosophical concept of all these things, this is where the issue or the challenge was. Malaysia, at that point of time, we were at critical crossparts in our future, or heading towards our future. Not in our future, we were at the crossparts, looking ahead of ourselves and thinking about what was going to be important. And many people within that region, I would say, if you really look back at history, this was when actually Singapore decided to go on their own, and then we had to also rethink about what we were going to do. Now, for failure of looking or having a long-sighted vision, we took more steps to address what were the needs at the current moment. Okay, And this was when you would have heard of things like the
NEP and all that.
the NEP and of course various other initiatives, FELDA, of course, if you look at it at that point of time, the idea or the philosophy again was to see how we can accelerate the development of certain segments of the community that were hardcore poor. Now, because of the heavy focus or emphasis that were given on all these different segments, I would say, the parts that we as a community needed were not looked into because of resources.
They were limited at the time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because why? If I'm going to spend at least 40 to about 50% of my resources into making sure that these are the promises that I fulfill to a certain group of people, I have to compromise my resources elsewhere. It's like running a company.
Yeah.
So when you run a company, sometimes you have to spend more for a certain part.
Yeah.
You go to another department and say, hey, you know what, budget slash this year. No choice lah.
No choice lah. Yeah,
if CEO tells you that, no choice lah. Jalan. Whatever you got, you make it happen. So
you work with what you have.
Exactly. So that was what we did. And that's why you see legacy issues of Tamil schools in close proximities, in outskirt areas, because it was looking at the need at that point. So the position of the society or community was such where our geography was situated at this location. Now, can we do anything about that now? In a simple way of just answering you, I would say no. Okay? Why? Because the solutions are expensive. If we were to relocate every school that was there, if we were to repurpose all those buildings, every solution has a cost to it.
But I feel that's a cop-out though. And I'll tell you why. I recently had a guest here. She was the founder of a group of schools called the Gains Education Group, right? And she basically started this by saying that she wanted to teach Islam using English as a medium.
Okay.
And what she has done is now she has grown her business to have 83 learning centers across Indonesia, Malaysia, and soon she'll be in Qatar as well. Why is it that the mobility in the private sector is so efficient, so quick, when the government has all the resources? Why can't they do it?
Okay. To answer your question is this, right? You've got to understand the direction that the government takes with the private sector. Now, when you're looking at a view of the government, or you're looking from the lens of the government, you've got to understand that, okay, number one, before we even start talking about how they support these people on a welfare basis, I've got to take care of them, which means I've got to spend money. I've got to relook at my processes. I've got to relook at my structure. I've got to relook at the bureaucracy of the system. I've got to relook at my alignment. And most importantly, I've got to look back at the assessments that are made in order to ensure that everything is done quick enough in order for me to bring an investor in or a company. Now, all that takes up a lot of time, because you've got to understand today, most countries, especially the first world countries, I think the best that we can learn from is Singapore. So Singapore does this in the most seamless manner. They get it done because everything today is all done in a virtual form. So the moment you come in, they have got data about you. They've got all these different ways of analyzing you within a system. And then by the time they get you approved for you to be an investor or for you to come into the country, it takes you less than the time required for you to be in Malaysia. Now, with everything that the government has to spend in order to make sure that these people come in and then set up shop here and eventually run their businesses for a significant amount of time. You don't want them to set up like a business today and then within 5 years when the government changes, they say, oh, you know what? We're running.
Yeah, of course you don't want that.
So why I say it's not easy, or in simple, just to give you simply how I don't see it as an immediate need, is because someone has to buy up these properties the moment they relocate. So you've got to look at basically getting those approvals done. While getting those approvals done, you've got to make sure that your next building is purposed to be a school, for example. Now, you've got to look at the timeline of all this stuff. And when you look at the time and the money that you're going to spend doing all this, you've got to ask yourself a question. Now, if I'm going to give the Indian community, say for example, 100 million or 150 million on an annual basis, am I going to spend a portion of that money doing this stuff? Because government is not going to carve out another set of budget just to satisfy you. We are dealing with limited resources. We've got to look at the situation from, again, you cannot just be on the receiving end and say, oh, you know what, we are victims. You've got to be pragmatic about the whole situation. The situation is such where if I am speaking to you and I am requesting something, I need to know whether you are really interested in funding that particular endeavor that I have. If not, if it's not in your plate or not in your appetite, you will not spend that money. The same way the government is looking at things right now.
And that is a very pragmatic and blunt way of putting it. I mean, it's honest, it's honest.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what the government, look at the government's resources right now.
I mean, even in the budget, last budget, so there was no additional allocation.
Yeah, because you know why? They are dealing with, we have to borrow money, you know. You know the rates right now? Malaysia has to bear for someone's sins lah.
Yeah. We don't mention names.
We has to, and when I say Malaysia, it's you and I. It's taxpayers, right? So, I'm not saying this particular person was the only one who did this lah. Okay, we have been dealing with this
for a long time,
for a very long time.
Yeah.
Okay. God bless a certain someone who recently passed as well. So he has got a certain reputation as well.
You're going to get me cancelled. Or in jail or something. I don't know.
Like I said, we're not mentioning names, so it's fine. But, I'm talking about issues that have been there. And again, many people are quick to critique Datuk Seri Anwar. You've got to understand the steps that are taken right now is to ensure that every aspect of a certain administration, especially within the state, that they have got influence on, whether it's, of course, Selangor right now is a very close call lah. Okay, they've got to do a lot of work there, but the other states, they've got to make sure that they take care of their bases really well, and they've got to understand that the partnership, especially with Sabah and Sarawak now, is of critical importance. Speaking from a political standpoint, this is, of course, a long-term game that he is also looking at. It's not easy because you've got to balance that with administration. And of course, like what certain people have mentioned that, it's a 5-year game. You try to segment it within 2, and then the next 3 years you start looking at your political survival and stuff like that. But it's not as easy as that.
So from what you're saying, it pretty much sounds like we aren't in the plans. It sounds like that. It is. And look, I accept your answer.
Do you want to be cancelled or not?
No, I mean...
No, I'm not saying that
we're
not... Okay, so it's not that we're not in the plans. There are certain parts that we need that's within, or rather in the plans as a need. So for example, everyone needs accessibility to free market with the least amount of barriers. So the government right now is taking a uniform stand to say that anyone that comes in, so it's not specifically race-based. So that's where you look at needs-based and you start pushing for policy implementations that are centered on what is needed rather than, a certain race group or a certain, bangsa will get kemudahan-kemudahan tertentu. We are not saying that, and we are not even doing that, because if you're looking at the system today, it has to a certain extent shifted to making the playing field a bit more level.
Okay.
So today if you look, okay, you are now doing a podcast, right? Did any agency member come here and say, you know what?
Touch it.
No, the thing is, because at the end of the day, people are doing podcasts all over Malaysia. Now, of course, at the end of the day, people will be talking about freedom of speech and all this stuff, right? But I think so far the government, I mean, kudos to them. I'm not, of course, this is not an effort to praise them too much. Of course, they have their, like what I said, with all the kinds of press that they've been getting with the court cases, and of course recently with the ethics of media, that has been discussed about. These are not good. It's not a good reflection of what
as compared to what they have promised.
Reform
before.
Is lah.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think, like I said, Datuk Seri Anwar is dealing with a very different set of challenges today, and these are things that need to be treaded better. So to answer your question for the final time, in the most, I think, conclusive way possible. There are plans to look at the needs of the community rather than the community itself. So there's
that means take a more macro approach.
A micro rather than a macro.
Micro rather than macro.
Yeah, so if you look at a poor, and this was very aptly put, if you look at a poor Indian, a poor Malay, and a poor Chinese, everyone has got the same need. They have to put food on their table. They have to be able to send their children to school. They have to be able to have social safety nets for themselves. And these are basic necessities if you're talking about your right to live today in a country.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the kind of approach that the government is trying to take. But of course, if you really look at what are the efforts required and the kinds of initiatives that have to be taken to communicate this, that's why I said the visibility has to be important. Earlier you asked about something that Prabha has to be, or has to work on rather. Number one is visibility. Number two is him being more outspoken about, the kinds of work that they do. Because at the end of the day, if you don't talk about this stuff and you don't talk about it enough, people will not remember it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah.
Now, you talked about business and access to the free market, which I completely agree. I think that's the way out in terms of the whole, to get yourself out of certain income groups. Free market is the best option, right? So speaking of statistics, for example, it is estimated that 14.3% of Indians are entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Compared to 22.4% of Bumiputra and 23.2% of Chinese. But most enterprises, there were, for example, they say from 2005 to 13, there were 37,896 Malaysian Indian companies deemed as active in the register of companies, 91% of which are micro businesses. 91%. So on the scale of large listed companies, for example, Malaysian Indian ownership of shares is only 1.5 to 1.6% in the past decade. So based on your experience, right, how do we bring Indians into the SME in a bigger way?
Okay. Looking at your statistics earlier, right? So you mentioned that there are Indian companies. So all these companies that are set up, there's only about 1% that is there.
1.5, 1.6.
1.6.
These are large companies. But in terms of the most of the business, 91% are micro enterprises.
Yeah. So
the question is, how do we bring these people into the SME sector?
Okay. Now the question here is, the first thing that we have to sort of consider is, are these businesses qualified enough to go into SME? And if there is an assessment being done, who's doing it? So that has to be looked at. There has to be some form of metrics to decide, okay, out of 91% of all these businesses, how many of them are actually qualified enough for us to push into the SME sector? Now, number two, there has to be an interest from these businesses to make that jump or leap. All right. So we just can't go and say, hey, the auntie selling the nasi lemak there for so many years she's been there. Oh, now we want to help you go into the SME sector. So of course, for them, they don't get that lingo all the time. Because you're talking about micro businesses. What do you think micro businesses do? They are very home oriented.
Yeah, freelancers, gig economy.
They probably can do it in their free time, and their mode of communication is in their mother tongue, or even, I think at best also they may speak a bit of English and Malay because they have to communicate. So now, when you talk about moving into the SME or elevating them into that particular segment, what are the kinds of initiatives that we have, and who's actually involved in all these areas? Because again, like what I talked about earlier, right, putting an integrated solution and then looking at, again, creating that pipeline of movement from the micro business segment into SME. Now, if we even look at microfinancing right now, the ease of obtaining microfinance for you to maybe amp up your business and go into the SME sector, is that accessible enough? So who's asking all these questions?
I think in the case of that, just one example I will use is, I know this because my wife is Chinese, so I was exposed to this. But there was this brand of, I think, chili paste that I saw, that Chinese will use a lot of this chili paste. So and on the bottle is this old lady's picture. Right? So she started off this business as in just a stall in a home, and now it's become a public company. we have seen cases in the Malay community recently of chili paste as well that has gone very big, right, making millions and all that. We've seen success stories. Perhaps the answer is that agencies should be created to empower these people with the skills they need. For example, I'll give you another example. Recently in social media, there was these guys who produced this movie. It's a Tamil movie, local Tamil movie, and nobody went to see.
Okay.
Right? So the question is not whether or not the movie was good enough to be viewed, was that perhaps there may not have been enough marketing, enough promotion, and all this. So shouldn't we then, to remove them from the micro business sector into small and medium businesses, equip them with the necessary skills to actually make that leap? Of course, I agree with you, not all businesses are fit for this.
Correct.
But there are gems within this pool. I mean, 91%, there must be a few gems there that we can elevate.
Sure. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but here's a question. So you talked about the paste, that y'all use at home. You talk about sambal nyet.
Sambal nyet, that's the thing.
Sambal nyet. Yeah. And then we've got babas, right?
Yes, we do.
So I'm just saying hindsight. If we go down that anecdotal lane, this is my issue.
Okay.
There's always examples that we can portray. Now, to be more specific and to look at, what can we do and how can we do it. So these are questions, like I said, someone has to be sitting down and looking at those mechanisms. When I talk about mechanisms, it's not just something that we do one-off. It's like, okay, for this year, we're going to do it. We're going to showcase and announce it to the public. It becomes a gimmick or a campaign and then done. There's no sustainability to it. There's no continuity to it. So you've got to look at, again, re-look back at the resources that we have. It's just plug and play. You got to go back to the basics of what are the kinds of services that are provided by the government for all these different segments, right? Whether you're talking about the micro businesses, you have SME Bank.
Yes.
You have SME Bank. You have got other corporacies that are there. So utilizing the kinds of services that they already have, plugging into so you got to think about how you basically assemble a computer. The way you assemble a computer is different depending on what is the functionality of the computer itself. That's the same kind of concept or thinking that you apply into this kind of challenges. So if you're going to assemble a set of solutions for micro businesses to move up into SME, you don't go and launch something that is new. You just basically take the stuff that you already have, put it all together, and then basically, once you have the whole system ready from back end to front end, you start running it. Once you have the system running long enough and you have got products to showcase, then you launch something and tell the people, okay, we are celebrating these 100 entrepreneurs as our initiative that we kickstarted, some time back. My only qualm with people announcing stuff before they do anything is they don't walk the talk, and most of the time when you really look at these initiatives, in Malaysia, we like to say shots in diri. We launch something, okay, this one we can say that we are successful after 5 years, but what happens after 5 years? Don't tell me after 5 years there's no poor people there or businesses. Everyone is going to be a businessman or everyone's going to achieve the kind of business market accessibility that we want. So when you talk about market accessibility, today, it's so easy to get into the free market.
Yes.
You get on TikTok, you're automatically in the free market.
Free market, yeah.
You get on Facebook, you get on Instagram. The moment you start marketing your product, you are already in the free market.
Yes.
Because you got to understand one thing. Nothing today is novel enough for us to claim that it's new. We are trying to find, and I don't really know why people do this, they try to find the differentiator.
The disruptor.
So you don't really need to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not about differentiating stuff. It's about improving your customer service. It's about improving your audience engagement. It's improving the experience for people. And you look at some of the best companies today in the world. The top company that everyone loves, and I think probably at least 80% of KLites would subscribe to, is Apple.
Of course.
You have the iPhone regardless of what the price is. You have the Apple Watch. You have all their products, their sets of merchandise, right? Now, what are they doing differently? Every year is the same phone.
Same phone. Yeah.
But people still go crazy because it's about the experience. It's about the Apple experience. It's about having, the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So you are part of a clan. You have a cult following of this
Which is
brand,
marketing, right?
Yeah, it's and they started this decades ago. So when Steve Jobs started this, eventually it became a culture. So if you listen to Simon Sinek, he tells you the story about a training session that he did with Apple and Microsoft. They were direct competitors. They are still direct competitors. Apple is so focused on creating the next thing for the future, meaning that they're not looking at a product. They're looking at what is a challenge that I'm solving of the future. So today your Apple Watch can tell you your heartbeat. Why did they do that? Because their focus was on health. How can we make health a bit more accessible for the common man who's using our product? The next thing you know, it becomes a wave and every company, decides to come up with.
But then that sort of ties back to what I was saying. Basically, sometimes I think people need to be educated on these skills. Then only will they be able to implement that on the products that they have.
Correct.
Because otherwise, or their business plans. So I'm just thinking that, but I guess you're right in the sense that we have to only use the resources that we have.
Yeah.
But I think Malaysia, as a government, we need to do better.
Of course. I mean, not just as government, as Malaysians generally, everyone basically has that mindset, right? There's nobody we know that wakes up thinking that, okay lah, probably there are a certain segment of the community that feel that, okay, you know what, I'm fine where I am. I don't need to do much because I'm comfortable, But I'm quite sure if you're running a company, if you're head of an organization, if you're, just say you as now, the person who coordinates this podcast, you've always got to think about evolving. You've always got to think about growing, morphing yourself into something better. And that is what every administration has at the back of their head, whether they like it or not. Because you know why? When you come into government, being the Prime Minister, you will be judged for the things that you do. All right? Now, you see, whether you like him or not, okay, Najib had two parts of the story. Today you see his buildings up. Okay. Whether you like those buildings or you find it to be a sight for sore eyes.
No, I like it. It's a tall building.
Yeah, but people will still say that's Najib.
Yeah.
You see the MRT, that's Najib. You see TRX, today TRX is a craze. Every influencer is flooding that spot to basically start, promoting themselves, promoting the products there. These were all, whether you like them or not, these were all projects of the Najib administration. So at some point, like what you mentioned, we have to start talking about, improving ourselves and doing things. But the question is, how much can we do and how soon can we do it? Because when you look at time, you look at costs, and you look at the quality of things that you need to do, I think these are not unknown stuff. If you talk about a roadmap, people want to see the products of the roadmap. So balancing all this stuff, and understanding the needs, the importance, when to do what, and how to actually showcase this. So there is a significant amount of tasks. If you look at the work task schedule of PMO right now, you'll probably have like 100 tabs of your Excel open.
From what you're telling me, okay, I'm not going to say that we are not in the plans, but what I'm saying is that if these initiatives and these development programs cannot necessarily take place because of lack of resources, right? And the thing is, nowadays we are living in a world whereby our politics is like the eternal ravaging sea. It changes every day, right? You hear shifting alliances and all that, and you were the one person. You're the best example of the sort of negative aspect of having switching governments, because I grew up in the time when BN was there forever, so policies could be placed, could be nurtured, outcomes could be appreciated. Now it's not like that.
Correct.
Right? In fact, the whispers in the corner is that we have a government in waiting to come on board. Right? So when things like this happen and there's no stability, which means that the first victim is long-term planning.
Correct.
Right? So, and before I finish my question, I just want to highlight this to the people listening, is that the narrative for the Indian people over the past few years or 10 year, 20 year, seems to make it sound like 90% of B40 are Indians. But actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, only 17% of the Indian community are part of the B40.
Okay.
83% are divided between the T20 and M40, right? So I just want to highlight that because I think people need to understand the real. We are not all, begging for food across the, we are actually doing well generally as a society, right? But do you think that the problems faced by the B40, people who need support, say in employment, in education, that these problems can be shouldered by the community, or in fact should be shouldered by the community if any change is going to take place?
Okay. Let me revisit your numbers for a while. As of 2020, and looking at, again, these assumptions are based on averages of the country, and of course, looking at global averages as well. For those, especially in the community itself, that's earning between less than $2,000 to $2,000 a month, 2,000 ringgit a month, sorry, is about 30%. Okay. Do you consider them B40?
I think the definition is that less than, there's a few categories B40, 1, 2,
Correct.
and 3. Yeah.
So, to me, I don't like to look at the B40 categorization because there are few concerns about it. When you say someone is earning anywhere between, say, for example, 500 ringgit to 2,000 ringgit a month, the next question would be, where do you live? If you live in KL with that salary, then definitely you belong in the B40 category. If you live in if you live in somewhere less affluent in, say, the outskirts of Malaysia, that amount of money could get you a decent place to stay. Okay. Now, those earning between 2,000 ringgit to 4,000 ringgit a month, that's about 25% of the community. So again, if you ask this question of what is B40 and are we in the plans of being, a concern of the government or an emphasis that's going to be provided certain amount of resources by the government, I go back to my answer, which is we're going to be a needs-based administration, and they need to be one. I can't say we because I'm talking about Malaysia. When you're looking at Malaysia, I'm talking about Malaysia from a lens where if I can speak and voice my opinion to the government, this is what I would say. Malaysia needs to be looking at needs-based now while maintaining the conversation on Bumiputra. Because you must understand sentiment. We can't be delusional about our conversations. That's one thing that we need to understand. So one very important, I would say, call to action for Indians in this country, if they decide to look into issues, they need to start looking at it from an analytical point. So when I speak about education, what is it that I actually want? Am I talking about the syllabus that's been taught in the classes? And if we look at the syllabus, you need to gain some understanding or insight on what is actually being taught. So you really need to look back at your program learning outcome. You need to look back at the subjects being taught. Are they relevant enough? And there has to be some proof to say that, look, we are not teaching what is actually being taught internationally.
So you're saying that there must be a clear path, a clear outcome. What is the problem? What is the solution?
There should be a clear analysis. There should be a clear analysis. Because if you're just speaking of tongue, of our tongues about, the education system is not right, or I don't know what is this party doing. So let me speak about MIC a bit if there is time.
Please, go ahead.
Now, MIC, you must understand this. Now, I work with many persons in MIC, and these were people who were in very influential positions. And in fact, I would invite them to sit down and have a conversation with me again. People, I think I can name them, like MIC is not an issue. So people like Datuk Seri Raj, people like YB Sarawanan, Datuk Sarawanan, sorry, not YB, Tan Sri Vicky, all these people who were there for a very long time. And now they are in very important positions. Again, they are in influential positions within the party itself. You may not see the importance of the party right now, but this is where the strength is. This is the point, or rather a part of your history where you look back at understanding your community better. Now, go back to your service centers, start doing a census of understanding your demographic. So if just say, for example, you're in Sungai Siput, in every taman. Try and get as much information as you can. Consolidate this information and come up with a good picture. Because only then can you again understand what are the needs and the demands that need to be addressed. When you look at that in a priority format, then you'll see that, okay, we can't do all 100 this year. We have to do maybe 3. And again, subsequently revisit those solutions that we do, measure the impact of it. But again, who is doing that? I can speak about it, and trust me, we can speak till the cows come home. Someone has to think about it. Unless they pay me well enough for it, then I can't be going and doing stuff like this. You see, but someone has to be stuck. Someone has to have that inspiration, or rather, the epiphany has to be there, lah. Okay, I hope when they are watching this, that epiphany comes.
I doubt, but we all can hope.
So I mean, I'm saying that I'm a glass half full guy, lah. I'm very optimistic. I am confident about opportunities because, and let me share something about Harriet Watt. All of us have an exercise where we develop something called an impact statement. An impact statement is something we begin our journey with exploring our purpose and then eventually understanding what we want to do for people around us, our circles of influence, and subsequently having a positive impact in the world. So my impact statement is actually what I sent you. I am a catalyst, and my purpose is to, again, reduce challenges, hurdles by offering them pragmatic solutions and solutions that have got a feasible timeline to it. So when we talk about the challenges of the community, yes, it's always going to be there. The conversations are always going to take place, whether you like it or not. I mean, we can be saying, you should look at numbers, you should look at the statistics, but you can't go and tell an old uncle who's sitting in the coffee shop to do all that, right?
Yeah. It has to be done by the leaders.
Yeah, I mean, even the leaders can do it, but think about it like this, right? If you're talking to someone over a glass of beer, that fella would not even be reading, the numbers, and he's not a numbers guy. He'll probably be seeing things on his phone, something off TikTok or Instagram, and then probably formulate his worldview based on that, right? Can you go and tell him, hey, look at the numbers, bro?
Not over a beer. That's not the best time to talk about numbers.
No, let's be practical,
Yeah, I know.
These conversations do take place in different scenarios or situations, lah. So I'm saying that even within the community itself, you can't stop people from having a perspective. And you can't stop people from having a certain view or an opinion about the happenings of the country. And if it's something that's closely related to them, like now we are talking about, a certain segment in the community. There are other people out there who are talking about their segment of the communities as well. So if you ask me, it's a cycle, and I think at some point it will phase out with the generation to come.
Of the thing about another part of this that actually needs to be considered. I mean, when we talk about our community, one thing that we suffer from, I think, after when you understand the numbers, when you understand the true stories, the true facts behind the sentiment, right? We are actually doing quite well. I wouldn't
say quite well, but we are doing considerably better compared to where we were when we started.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, if you look at the annual growth rate of our income, household income, we are the highest for 2022, if I'm not mistaken, 2.9%. Higher than India, Chinese and Malays. In all T20, M40, B40 groups, we are the second highest in terms of household income, mean income as well. So we are not. The point I'm trying to make is we are not where, if you were to just listen to the narratives out there, you would think we are the worst of the worst of the worst, right?
Yeah.
And that's fair to say. The problem with us is, our community is that I think we are suffering from a severe brand crisis. The perceptions around the community, and you have to understand, I'm a marketing guy, so I will definitely always talk about branding and the PR.
Understood.
Yeah. So do you think that one of the big hurdles to us being viewed or in better light is simply that we basically need to conduct an entire brand overhaul and get these facts out there about us, which are not spoken about a lot?
Okay, so speaking about brand overhaul, we can't brand the community. because everyone is branding themselves.
Yeah.
But of course,
I mean, change the perception.
yeah. So I like to bring this point to focus right now. If you look at the top CEOs in the Silicon Valley right now, so if you're talking about some of the top CEOs right now who are leading tech companies in America and across the globe, for a fact, you will see many of them of Indian origin. And if you are someone who is cognizant about, global affairs, looking at, global economics, happenings of businesses that are taking place, especially in trade and all these different areas of commerce, you will start to wonder, hey, what's happening? There's got to be something actually taking place here. And it's amazing because these are people that represent leadership at the highest level. And you're talking about people that not even T20, you're talking about the T.5% of the world that's sitting at the same table, and we've got people of Indian origin there. So for us as a community, I think what needs to happen is we need to look at what we do and doing it better and doing it to the best of our ability, and subsequently showcasing it enough. So if you talk about a community overhauling, I mean, you can't social ills of the community, this is something synonymous. You can't there are parts about our history we as much as we would like to erase it, I mean, it's there. And of course, we're not proud about it. And if we want to rebrand ourselves, the idea will be to look at our productivity. So how productive are you as a person? And that's essentially the theme of 2024. Whether you're a person, whether you're an organization, the general theme and I would say focus of the year is looking at productivity. And the more productive you are, the more value you get for yourself. And by showcasing your value is by, again, putting in more time, more work, and understanding that there's no more work-life balance. We are not in the era or generation of work-life balance. In fact, work and life right now, I would say, is very much integrated.
Yeah, it is.
Everything that you do is for work, and every part of your work is your life. So that way of productivity is important, because I think even when we are not working, we're still somewhat thinking about work. For example, myself, when I'm done with work and I'm taking a drive back home, at the back of my head, I like to call it my idea mile, because throughout the whole journey, I'll be still thinking about work and trying to think about solutions and stuff like that. So I think the more people start to grasp that, especially within the community setting itself. And the other thing, so this was one very important part where I missed out, and I hope that people who are listening, they can actually understand this better. If it's too late for you, it's fine, but try and do this for your kids or your nieces or nephews if you have one. The importance of language. Language is of utmost importance. I can't stress on how greatly that needs to be pushed for the community itself. So if you are someone of the Indian origin, if you have a child, or if you are looking to pick up languages, please make sure you have at least 4 or 5 languages that you're able to speak. And these are languages that are predominantly of modes of communication in the bigger markets. For example, Mandarin, which is in China. If you can speak Russian, it'll be great. Okay, and then pick up a language in Europe, from Europe, French or German. Then, of course, if you can speak your local BM and English, your own mother tongue, I think the more languages you pick up is great, especially for those who are within our age group. We may not be able to use it all the time, but what is more important right now is for the next crop of young people in the community. Young parents who are now starting to look at education for their kids. I think this is an area that needs to be stressed on greatly. The more languages, because you must understand the future is language. It's not so much about what you can offer as a person in terms of your hard skills, because let me be honest, Vinod, There are engineers in every part of the world. It's not exclusively to Malaysia. What differentiates you as an engineer is not about your ability of being an engineer, it's what experience you have. So if you're lucky enough to get into, and of course, if you're hardworking enough, you make enough opportunities for yourself to get into a good company, and you have of course, at that point of time, you have the opportunity to also work on good projects, that makes you a good engineer. But the future is becoming increasingly automated, in which we will need to start understanding languages across borders in order to integrate solutions. So if I speak to you and you are someone, say, from a different part of the world where, I can speak your language and I can start offering you services as an organization, I become of value to you.
Yeah, definitely. The world is a village now. Yeah.
So it's not just about, we're going to talk English, what? So you got to understand this. You see, when I give you a very simple anecdote, right? And this anecdote resonates very closely with all of us. We get so excited when someone who's not from the community is able to speak Tamil.
Yes, definitely.
It becomes a viral video. For some reason, everyone just gets excited. There's that feel-good factor to it. Now, take that, step it up 1,000 times. You are now at the business level. That's the business level of things. If you have someone from America who's able to speak fluent Mandarin and he understands, what you speak, and he's talking to you and talking about, his business, you'll be so comfortable with him or her, So what I'm saying is communication is not just about how you speak, it's about what you speak as well, and how well you speak what you speak. Because in the future, our children, or even, their children, they will be living in a world that's almost without boundaries. Technology is making that increasingly possible.
Yeah, definitely.
So everyone's able to go from whichever part of the world, communicate, share content. And then if you are able to produce content for certain parts of the world as well, today you look at, movies in India being pan-India. Have you heard of that?
With the foreign actors.
No, pan-India means now it's across India. So it's no longer just, a Hindi movie. So it's a Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, all.
Yes, a lot of languages in one.
Yeah, so that's a pan-India approach, because India is recognizing that even in its diversity, it still needs to cross different cultures, language barriers. So they start making movies that are catered for that.
Correct, yeah.
So this is the future, and if we are not aware of this, eventually we will lose out. And it's not a question of, what needs to be done for the Indian community back then or in time to come. So we've got to really think about having values for ourselves before we start looking at.
So you're saying that the focus of education should now morph to become place more emphasis on language then?
Of course, if you ask me, whether education should be that way or not, who am I to answer that, right? Because I'm not the DG of education or the minister. But if you ask me whether I would like every young Malaysian to be able to speak at least 5 different languages, I would love that. So every young kid who is coming out of their Form 5, they are able to speak 5 languages on top of your coding. So even coding is a language. So
so that's interesting that you bring that up when you talk about the world and how it's going to change and all that. Now, I think there was an article just a few weeks ago, I think last week, I can't remember, where they were talking about how AI and how foreign companies are already, all the big, PwC, if I'm not mistaken, all these big market research companies have already predicted that thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs are going to be lost or replaced by AI. Right? So when you talk about the youth today in Malaysia, including the Indian youth as well, what should be different to prepare them for a world where a lot of the tasks, when they walk into the working world, a lot of the tasks will be taken over by AI?
It's about how fast you put a solution together. How can you use accessibility to technology, AI? Okay, so people have this misconception about AI taking over jobs. AI is running different business functions today. Marketing for you, to create content, AI is able to do that for you. You go on platforms like ChatGPT, you get very good content write-ups. Today, you don't look at copywriters anymore because ChatGPT can definitely do it for you. So if you look at so copywriters came to be because there was a function of business. It was not because copywriters was a job that was created. They knew that, okay, now I'm going to put out an ad. I'm too lazy to do it on my own, and I've got too much things on my plate to even look at it. I need to hire for copywriting. So what AI has come and done is AI has actually improved that way of you doing business. So if you are a business owner, you have removed that need for a copywriter, which is basically cost cutting for you lah. Now for copywriters, what do they need to do? Now they need to understand that they have to evolve as an individual. Do they still remain copywriters? If they do, then of course there'll be very limited opportunities. You know, but if they do evolve, then they'll probably look at a more holistic way of writing. You know, so it may not necessarily be copywriting. They may now have to look into training and how do you become prompt engineers, you know, to have better copywriting on your AI systems. So these are things that I believe youth in our segment of the community have to be, again, sensitive to the changes that are happening. If you're not well read, if you're losing track of global affairs, then you will definitely lose out on this, because you must understand, when innovation happens, it starts with the conversation of a few people. And then that starts to spread. The question then begs to be answered is, how late are you to the party?
Yeah, true.
You know, so, you know, when Facebook happened, all those who were in Palo Alto, they were the ones closest to what was happening. So literally, everyone who wanted to invest in Facebook were people who were literally living like, you know, 4 or 5 blocks away. Eventually, I'm not saying just over time they did it, but today you look at the stakeholders of the company, these were people, and the ones who actually have significant stake. These were people who, of course, they knew the value of Facebook either early on, and they managed to, you know, get on the train. Today, they're making the big bucks. Of course, there are other investors, retail investors like us, who eventually pay a higher amount for stocks. You also have institutional investors like Berkshire and all these guys who pump in a lot of money. They buy over a certain percentage of the whole pool. So the question again is, how fast are you innovating? How fast are you looking at
reinventing yourself?
Reinventing yourself, understanding processes about, you know, what you want to be involved in. So if you say, okay, today logistics, very common with the community. Everyone wants to be in logistics. Everyone wants to own a lorry and stuff like that. Now, what are we evolving about the whole logistical system in Malaysia? Are we doing anything to change it? Because people who are changing it today, they are the ones who are leading the race in the technological aspect of it. So, to put it in a nutshell, I would say you've got to understand where you are, where you want to be, and how fast can you improve your processes.
Okay. So just to wrap this whole thing up, you've been part of SETIC, as I said, and we've been talking a lot about the Indian community today.
Yeah.
So, and seeing how we are, unfortunately, you know, we have discussed a lot of solutions as well.
Yeah.
But you personally, based on your experience, what are the types of solutions you would like to see rolled out in the next coming years to elevate the Indian community further from where we are now?
I honestly think that, number one, we need to look into getting investments for more technical development, meaning creating manufacturing opportunities for local businesses. Because we have got a significant amount of people that are in the gig segment, but we don't have enough businesses that are there who can basically start moving into job creation. I'm not saying that we don't have it at all. We do have roughly about, I think, 5% of business owners right now are job creators in the Indian segment. We need to see a move up or a shift from 5% to at least 10%. Because if 10% of the community can start creating jobs, we will slowly start seeing a tilt in the economical well-being of the people. So if you want to be in a good shape as an economy, you got to understand this as how I see the Chinese segment. So you see today in the Chinese community itself, they are, whether it's at micro business level or whether it's at SME level or in the bigger industries, you have got significant amount of job creators, companies that are there creating jobs. And there are people who basically join these companies and they are trained in those companies for a specific skill set, whether it's in engineering, agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare, whatever it may be, right? Now, without job creators, your accessibility, whether you like it or not, will to a certain extent be hindered. Because why? You're still competing with a larger group of people. Now, think about it this way. If I am able to employ, okay, of course, this has to be something that I do it on a basis where I feel that I want to empower the community. And I feel that, okay, as part of my total workforce, I want to allocate maybe 30% for people of my community who are talented, skilled enough, and I want to develop them. So that consciousness or awareness has to be there. That is basically the next level. So if you have enough job creators, the job creators have to come together and say that, okay, we want to invest back into the community. We have to relook at investing into the community. So if you ask me, I would like to see more reinvestments into the community from the private sector, especially business owners that belong to the community itself, whether it's in the context of Malaysia or people living out of Malaysia, the Malaysian diaspora, especially business owners that are of Malaysian origin. I think this will be a good time to relook at, contributing back in significant areas. So you can either look at, again, I mentioned this earlier, microfinancing for smaller businesses, or to create grants for businesses to even start, from there. I believe we have done this in the past, but I'm not sure whether we have measured the impact of it. And looking at the impact, can we now say that, okay, let's change a bit of the processes that were done in the past? And I'm quite sure Mitra is thinking about this. Again, I am speaking about this based on an opinion point of view. Mitra, of course, has got several initiatives that they've been rolling out. They've been working with, I think, Bank Pembangunan as well, quite recently. They've been launching some drone development classes, some training or something like that. I can't remember what exactly it was. But like I said, I'm quite sure somewhere in the pipeline there are efforts to basically start shifting the direction of the community. But I think also with that has to come the expediency lah. So you have to think about a more immediate timeline. You can't be thinking about, when we're going to be closer to elections, then we want to launch everything. So having said that, I feel that we've got to be more immediate, more frequent, more intensive with the efforts that are being rolled out. Even when Prabha comes into his position after this, one thing I would like him to be seen doing is being more visible in areas, especially areas that have got a significant amount of B40 Indians, speaking to them, understanding them. Eventually, after everything, coming up with a report to say that, okay, look, we've visited X amount of areas, we know exactly what needs to be done, and we're going to be looking at a phase-by-phase strategy in solving all this, having a timeline there, looking at, how much resources are going to be allocated, and sticking to that. So once you announce it, it's good to announce it if you already know the numbers. Do not come out with half-baked numbers, because that makes you just look bad. If you want to really come up with a study, make sure you do a thorough study. I know in the past, SEDIC has engaged with few consultants to look at, various studies. Some of them were not too, we were not too keen on proceeding because of cost-related issues and stuff. But if this time we do decide to go on with consultants, I think the direction has to be clear. So instead of them telling us what they found, we have to be clear and we have to communicate to them and tell them that, okay, look, this is what we aim to achieve. So you have to have an objective, you have to have your strategies in place, and then eventually working on your methodologies to achieve them.
Interesting. That's very true. I agree with you 100% there. Now, as we come to the close, thank you so much, man, for coming on board.
You're welcome.
We really discussed a lot of things. I hope you come on again. I think this conversation needs to go on and on. There's so many.
Have some big names as well, then we can have a more fruitful discussion.
Bring on them, then we can interrogate them about things. Yeah, perfect. So, so that's all, folks, for today. Thank you so much again, Marques, for coming here and sharing your insight.
Thank you for having me.
No worries, man. Thanks for everything. And so, are you going to join the next? Are you planning to go back to politics? At least the whole administrative strategy side, are you?
I think if there is a need for it, right now I think there are enough brilliant people in government, and there is a pool of very young and talented Malaysians who are keen about this. I'm not saying I do not want to go back. Of course, when I do go back one day, or if I am by some miracle called back, for me, the idea is to come in and really look at how do we structure our solutions better, and ensuring that it's really felt. So it's not just about talking about it. If I say the economy is doing good, you have to feel that the economy is doing good. You've got to really have money in your pocket. So yeah, and hopefully that time we can really look at things I would say from a better baseline.
Okay, fair enough. We wish you the best.
Thank you.
You are a very, and I think you have a bright future ahead, man. So all the best to you.
Very generous of you.
No worries. Thanks. So thank you all for watching. And as always, if you guys have any comments, you guys have any questions, you can share them. And if you have any questions for Marques, I will be happy to share your questions with him as well. Till next time, always remember, subscribe, share, follow, like, and take care, guys. And if you guys have any thoughts on feedback, please share again. Take care. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.